Hello and welcome to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined today by Matt Michaels of Missouri Baseball Radio. He does a fantastic job doing Mizzou baseball games along with his partner, Tex Little, a fabulous listen every single time. Appreciate all that they do for SEC baseball. We're going to talk about Missouri's season to this point, which is frankly layered. I mean, outside expectations were low. It's an extremely young team. No one really knew what to expect. And honestly, if you look at it from a step back, it's really been an extremely competitive team over the last 18 or so SEC games. So I'm excited to get a little in the weeds with Matt on this team. So we will do that in just a second. But first, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. Matt, how did I do? 1 to 10 on that ad read. What do you think?
That was pretty solid. I have quite a few of them to do in my day today when I'm on the air. So I think you passed with flying colors, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you on, Matt, a two-time guest now. We chatted with Matt earlier in the season in 2023. So interesting to have the conversation at a different time of year with him. Obviously, Missouri first-year head coach Kerrick Jackson. I mentioned that it's a young team, a lot of new faces. So what have we learned, Matt, about kind of independent of the individual performances, what a Kerrick Jackson-led Missouri team is? What do we know so far?
Well, I think when it's at its best, you can break it down into a couple of different places. I think the foundation remains pitching and defense oriented, which is what has worked at Missouri in the past and what has worked for Missouri when Kerrick Jackson spent his time as an assistant under Tim Jamieson, and Coach J being back and working with the pitchers. You kind of hear comments from them that it's more of an old school approach than new school in terms of working with them. And so I think that maybe harkens back to, hey, we've had success doing these two things. Let's make that our foundation, and let's create an offense that is aggressive, that is able to create some havoc and put pressure on defenses. And I think what we've seen, especially as we've gone into, like you said, the last 5-6 weeks of league play, is that when it's working right, you see a defense, or an offense rather, that's able to put men on the base paths and then force the defense to make the proper play. Now, the issue has been throughout the course of the season, it's been very inconsistently, applied. It's been hard to execute for a group that has started regularly, 3, 4, 5 freshmen in the starting lineup throughout the entirety of the year, and doesn't have the same sort of physicality in the lineup that some other teams in the league would have. But I think, at least from what we've seen right now, and we'll see how this evolves over time, right, is you have a team that's going to pitch it well, going to try to play as clean a defense as possible, and will be able to create on offense, maybe with being able to pass the bat instead of looking for the bases clear. This is not going to be Earl Weaver's dream team, but it might be Kerrick Jackson and Missouri's dream team going forward if they're able to do those sorts of things. And you can see the pieces in place to do that. And I mean, you look at a couple of underlying statistics too, like 2-out RBI, this team's gotten it done. The problem is they've gotten to 2 outs really quickly in innings, and sometimes they've had to start it from 2 outs in the rally, so it's a little bit of give and take. But when it's worked, it's looked really good at times this season. And I mean, you can ask the Florida Gators how it worked in a few close games earlier in the year, but just keeping that consistency together has made it hard, I think, to say, Joe, what everything's going to look like in a year or two from now. I can say what it looks like right now is, and something Coach Jackson talks about all the time, just play clean baseball. And Bryson LeBlanc, the Tigers hitting coach and assistant and third base coach, says clean baseball is boring baseball. And really it is. You go out there, you make the plays you're supposed to make, and then by the time you look up at the finish, if you do that for 9 innings in a row, you should be right there with an opportunity to win the game or steal a game at the end if you need to. And in Missouri's case, they just haven't played clean enough all year long to have that be consistent game 1 through game 56. But when it's been there, that's what it looks like.
For those who are not old like Matt and I, Earl Weaver used to manage the Orioles, and his, the whether or not it was actually what he preached. I mean, the perception of it feels like it might be a little apocryphal, Matt, the whole like 3-run homer thing with Earl Weaver, but that was what he was known for, is teams that just kind of waited on the 3-run homer. And, he was frankly kind of ahead of his time in that regard, interestingly enough. So a little bit of a visionary there. Let's talk a little bit about Tim Jamieson. Fascinating story. Obviously, I wrote about it in the fall just because maybe something like this has happened before, but if so, I'm not aware of it, where a longtime head coach comes back in an assistant role under one of his mentees, basically. What have you heard from pitchers or just folks around the program as to what he's been doing that's clicked with this pitching staff? Because we'll get into some of the details in a minute, but it's inarguable this pitching staff has gotten better as the season has gone on and has found more pieces.
Some of the things I've heard kind of to that more old school approach is that Coach Jay is really good at analyzing a swing. Like, he'll go ahead and he'll look at the opponent and he'll say, okay, this is where the hole in the swing might be. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to work this way to a batter. Instead of saying, let's take the heat map, let's take the spray chart and take it from that side. I mean, it's achieving the same thing, right? It's trying to find a weakness in a hitter and attack them that way. So I think that it has clicked maybe in a different way for a couple of pitchers, and maybe even some of them who are more used to a more analytical, maybe numbers data-based approach. Not saying that Coach Jay doesn't use the numbers. I know he does, but it's a different way of communicating it, and a way that he's very comfortable with. In terms of, his fit with everything that's gone on and coming back home. I mean, his dad was a longtime Missouri coach within the athletic department. He's a Columbia lifer. He is someone who, I think, when the opportunity presented itself to come back, probably had to do a little bit of a double take himself. But when everything aligned, and certainly with Coach Jackson in the fold, he said, yeah, this is an opportunity that I'll make the move with him. And, it could have been his opportunity to maybe stay on at Memphis or look at something else, somewhere else with a head coaching job. And he said pretty consistently, I love getting back into being a pitching coach. The coaching is what I really love. Some of the other stuff a head coach has to do, he's done before. Maybe he doesn't like it so much anymore. The fit's been great. I think he's been a wealth of information, a good sounding board for Coach Jackson. And, the way he's worked with the pitchers has been a little bit more maybe outside of what some of them have grown used to, or where maybe the game seems to be going. But in terms of the results, you can't argue with it. I mean, he's going to want to attack. His pitchers, I think, have that attack-based mentality as well. You don't see Missouri pitching around too many. They didn't really pitch around any South Carolina Gamecocks this past week. They didn't pitch around any Florida Gators earlier in the season. They're going to go after it, and they're going to try to be aggressive and attack and force, again, the opposing offense to make the play. And if they do, and you have to tip your cap, so be it.
Yeah, he's Tim Jamieson, famously a pretty stoic guy. You don't get a lot from him, but you can just see as I like to watch in pregame, he's, kind of pacing around the outfield, working with pitchers as they're getting stretched out or throwing or what have you. And you can just kind of see with the way he does that he's like a pig in slop out there, just getting to like work with pitchers. And that's it. Like, that's just what he's doing. And you're right. He was pretty open about that too. When I talked to him in the fall, is just like, especially with the move to the SEC, the parts of the job that weren't coaching were just so numerous. And, I think he's, to your point, I think he's enjoying just kind of being able to hyper focus on like, I'm doing this one thing and everybody else is leaving me alone. And I'm just taking, he just seems like he's having a good time with it. And the results, as we mentioned, hard to argue. Missouri in SEC play, ERA right in the middle of the pack in the conference. And I think a lot of people might be surprised by that, but that's the reality of the situation. What pitching performances, whether as a group, on an individual level, what have you, have stood out to you to this point?
Well, I think in terms of what individuals have been able to do, I don't think that there was an expectation for Ryan Magdish to come in by the last couple of weeks. He's been an SEC starter, whether it's been by necessity with the Thursday, Friday, Saturday at Tennessee, or whether this past weekend it was, hey, we're going to throw Magdish out there. He's a left-hander. Carolina's splits are not that good against left-handers. We're going to see what he's able to do. I mean, here's a guy who was in junior college at Division II and didn't pitch at all last year, and they stretch him out for this year, and he becomes, a really good pitcher in this league. He throws in the mid-90s. He's got a good secondary pitch with the breaking ball. He's thrown in a changeup every now and again his last couple outings, which I don't think is something he was doing early on in the season. It was more of a 1-2 punch from him. And that story is just testament to the fact that if you find the right person with the right makeup, and we see it all the time in this league when it comes to the junior college ranks or from other places, people all of a sudden step forward. But Magdish wasn't necessarily on anybody's radar, but Missouri got a whiff of him, and it turns out that he's a good leverage pitcher. I think that Javen Pimentel's probably been the most consistent arm of the season, and it probably goes back to, like we were mentioning with Coach Jay. He's going to attack. He gives you everything he has, even when what he has isn't his best. He's going to go out there and give it 100%. And, I think it's a 4.08 ERA in league play. He's been able to stymie opponents. I mean, Javen pitched against that Arkansas lineup that can do some damage when it gets hot, and pitched them 5 nearly hitless. I think it was only 1 or 2 hits. It was one of the better individual performances of the season. Logan Lunsford's ERA is elevated because he's run into some trouble in a couple of outings, but I think lately he's been a lot better. When he's able to locate his changeup, he's still one of the better pitchers that the team has. And, Carter Rustad, in Missouri's win this past week against South Carolina, Pimentel goes down with an apparent arm discomfort. I mean, he's coming off of, I believe, a shoulder injury from last year. So whether it was just a scare or not, we don't know. I don't have any update on his status for this coming weekend, but I can tell you that Rustad came in and he just treated it like a start. He warmed up in the bullpen even. He didn't come on the game mound. He just said, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to handle this the right way. And Rustad was as good as we've seen him at Missouri, 6 2/3 innings. And that's kind of what I think Missouri had hoped from him. He kind of turned a little bit more into a swing man, in the sense that Missouri would use him if they had a chance to win a game in the middle of the conference year. But how he performed this last week, and depending on Pimentel's availability, I wouldn't be surprised to see Rustad back in a starter's role. He just got bit by a couple of long balls, and I think that the pitchers have worked overall on their command and improved it through the course of the season. And not that they weren't throwing strikes, more location within the zone. You can't make the mistake in this spot. And that's where the mistake would be. And I think that has really cleaned itself up. And, as Missouri's staff was last year, some of these guys are maybe pressed into service in places where it's a little bit uncomfortable, but that's where growth comes from. I mean, you don't have Sam Horn, who would have profiled to be possibly your Friday night starter at the beginning of the season. You don't have Tony Newbeck over the balance of the season, who would have been a big difference maker no matter where he would have landed. And navigating those sorts of things, I think, has made a difference to Missouri pitching. It looked a lot deeper, I think, at the start of the conference season than it does right now. They might have to fight through a couple of nagging things, but who doesn't at this time of year? And, someone else who's come on, I think, has been Bryce Mayer. He started as a Friday night guy on this team, and Mayer struggled early in his starts. And you could see it pretty well through the first 3 weekends of the season that early was the rough part for Mayer. Well, he got in the bullpen, figured a couple of things out. He's a 5-pitch pitcher, but he kind of pared down his pitch selection and has really improved, I think, over the last month and a half as a result. And Mayer's another guy who, again, was injured all of last season. So this is his first real true test in the SEC. And I think we're finally starting to see him come along and be more of a steady ship, if you will, wherever he's used in the course of a weekend for Missouri.
I would urge listeners to go seek out a Ryan Magdish outing, just because he's an interesting guy. It's like a fastball with ride on it, and it's the velo is good, but it's not light up the radar gun good in a way that you see in the SEC. But like, hitters react to it like it is. Like, it's a lot of late swing, it's a lot of uncomfortable swings, and he's a unicorn in that. Typically, guys who have been on 4 teams in 4 years is kind of a red flag. And Kerrick Jackson will be open about that. Like, hey, look, we looked into the guy. Like, we ask around, we ask everybody who's ever come into contact with Ryan Magdish. Of course, I'm going overboard there, but he did say, we did a lot of research on this guy, and it just turned out that, like, yeah, it's just a weird deal. He's been at 4 schools in 4 years, but no red flags. So anyway, I just say that to alert listeners, if you've not seen a lot of Missouri baseball this year, he's a fun pitcher to watch and to seek out his outings. Let's flip to the lineup, Matt. First things first, how important has Trevor Austin been just as a glue guy? He was really the one guy, in this lineup that was coming back with any sort of lengthy track record. And what has his season been like as that glue guy?
Well, I think it's been pretty consistent. I think that at times Austin has probably suffered from feeling the pressure of being that guy. He's been hitting in the 2-3 spots in the lineup really for the majority of the season. He plays anywhere in the field you want him to. In fact, the past few games, he's played in right field again. So he was a left fielder for a lot of last year and a second baseman, and then he was at third base for much of this season, and now he's back at right field. I mean, he doesn't really, it doesn't matter to him where he goes there. I think that maybe at times he's felt, hey, I have to be one of the power threats on this team. And he's improved his power numbers, right? He's hit double-digit home runs for the first time in his career. He still gets hit by the pitch. He still finds a way to get on base. In fact, he's the only Tiger who's on base more than 40% of the time in SEC games. And I actually just looked this up before we went on the air. I think he has scored 17 runs in league games, and no other Tiger has scored more than 9. So I think that tells you the importance of Austin to this team. He's going to have to be in the middle of stuff for Missouri to have success, unless a couple other people pick it up from the day to day. But it's really important. I think it would be hard to see where Missouri would have as much success as they've had without Trevor Austin being a consistent piece to all of this. And it doesn't mean he hasn't had his ups and downs. I'm sure that Trevor would have hoped for maybe a little bit more out of himself, but who doesn't? And I don't say that to say that the year's been disappointing. It's just, you have all these hopes coming in as the guy who stays. He stays home. He's from just down the road in Jefferson City. He's a Missouri Tiger for life. I think that Tiger baseball fans will look back on Trevor Austin very fondly in terms of the time that he's given to the program and certainly what he's meant to this season. But his consistency and his ability to be there every day is something that this lineup would really miss if he were to miss any time. Unfortunately, he is not.
Yeah, he and Jackson Lovich, really the two guys that have made things go. Lovich missed a little time with a thumb injury, but when he's been in there, he's been really consistent. Those two guys have made it go. One guy who appears to be swinging a little better these days is Danny Corona, who, at least in terms of raw talent, is probably the best Mizzou has. A Wake Forest transfer who was a big part of that team that came within a breath, basically, of getting to the CWS finals. What has been behind Danny Corona's resurgence and him heating up in the way that he has it, or it appears the last week, 10 days or so?
Well, I think he's kind of made the adjustment a little bit. I'm sure that he felt some of that pressure too. I mean, here I am. I'm the transfer. I was a big part of what Wake Forest did last season. And he understood that he was here to, be able to do some damage and provide a little bit of pop. And we didn't really see those things from him early. It was difficult for him, I think, to make the adjustment over the course of the year. And then in the last couple of weeks, I mean, he's been open about saying, I've kind of geared it down maybe a little bit, just try to keep things simple, try to take my approach and make it consistent from my first pitch to the last pitch in an at-bat, from my first at-bat to my last at-bat in a game. And we've seen some of those results from him. There were times this season where it looked like he was trying to hit for power. And, you can do that sometimes, but you can't necessarily do that all the time, certainly not in this league when the pitching's so good. And so I think him staying a little bit more locked into his approach and trying to embrace that has helped him come on. And you're right, in terms of what he can do hitting a ball, Danny is a very, very talented player. I mean, he hit a home run, just a line shot out to center field. I think it was 109 off the bat in Sunday's game against South Carolina. He's got that type of potential in him. It just was a very, very slow start, and him making the adjustments now is coming at a good time for the team because they're going to have to win a whole lot of games, and Danny Corona is probably going to have to be a big part of their wins coming down the stretch here.
You mentioned a lot of freshmen in the lineup. That includes a group of Drew Culbertson, Mateo Cerna, Caden Peer, Thomas Curry. At various points, they've all been a big part of things. The answer is probably all of them to some degree, but whose stock are you buying as a guy who is really going to be a cornerstone moving forward for this program?
Well, I think Peer stands out as one of the highly recruited freshmen in the class. And, he's an in-state guy, and he's the type of player that Missouri would like to keep and develop. He's got great speed. I think that he'll be able to develop even maybe a little bit more with the small game as time goes on. I think he can beat some stuff out to first base, and he can still profile as a power type hitter. It does leave his bat different when he gets it. He's been out of action the last couple of weeks. He's been a little bit nicked up, and so we hope to see him back very soon. I know he's been able to swing a bat. Mateo Cerna really stands out to me too. I was talking to people before the season about, Jettier AKA they call him Yadi Hernandez. He's probably going to be the everyday catcher, right? And what I heard was, watch out for Mateo Serna. He's going to have an opportunity. He's someone who Kerrick Jackson found and was going to bring to Memphis and convinced him to come to Missouri. And Serna has really come on with the bat, especially lately. He's been the DH the last couple of weekends for this team. He's very well intentioned. I think as he grows in being able to handle pitchers and being able to be defensively a little bit stronger behind the plate, you'll see him really grow because his mindset with the pitchers is really good. Here's a freshman who in fall ball did not hesitate at all to go out and talk to his pitchers and handle the staff. And, he has those sorts of inclinations out of that American Heritage program out in Florida that has produced the Casas brothers. He is someone who understands the game. I think really is intentional about the way he plays the game. And I'm really excited to see what he does going forward. And I think Culbertson too, it's not easy to be an SEC shortstop. And he's been the everyday SEC shortstop. And he struggled at the dish. There's no two ways about it when he's gotten into this league. And I think at some point, Missouri just said, he committed some errors early, but we see the potential in the bat. You're going to profile as someone who can be our everyday shortstop or an everyday middle infielder going forward. You've got the job. And I think that Culbertson having the job has improved his play on defense, where maybe early he was just a little bit anxious. Most of his 11 errors came in the first half of the season. He's been really a stalwart over there at the Keystone. And also, just to give yourself a chance, get these at bats. If it's going to be a struggle now, let it be a struggle. And we've seen some key hits from him. He hit a big triple against Georgia where he sent one deep to the right center field gap. And teams have played aggressively against Culbertson in terms of playing him shallow. And I'm telling you, he's got pop. He just is not right now consistent enough as a freshman to show it all the time. And I think that him going forward, as he matures and gets another year in the weight room, another year having seen pitching, you could see Culbertson come on in a big way. I've been really impressed with the way he's handled himself in a difficult position, which is you're going to be a freshman in the toughest conference in America, playing one of the more high-profile spots in America. And he's done really well with it, I think.
Final question for you, Matt. Coming down the stretch, last 6 SEC games of the year, Mizzou trying to claw their way to Hoover. How big would it be? And I know Kerrick and the team are not in the business of moral victories and what have you. I get that. But I think you and I, as people outside of the 4 walls of the locker room, can look at it and say, that would be an accomplishment. What would it mean for this team to fight their way to getting to Hoover this season?
Well, I think of this in a couple of ways. And one way I think of it is, it's not like Missouri was missing Hoover every year, right? And it's something that has happened at the program. I think the perception from outside the program is that, well, Missouri, they're in 14th place every season and everybody just looks down at it. And that's not what has happened. Okay, so get that out of the way. But the second part of it is for this unit and where it was to start the season, especially in the non-conference, very young and very green. And then to find out over the course of the league season that, yeah, we can win a few of these games. In fact, if we play our best baseball, we can win some of these games going away. I think what that has done is showed the team the proof of concept, right? Like, we can stick in this thing. I don't think the club's given up at all, despite some of the struggles and finding themselves on the outside looking in right now. I think the intentionality of how they play is there. I don't really see anybody really giving away at bats, at least in important parts of the game. But I think what it would mean to this team to make Hoover in this final year that you have to qualify is, just a concept that, yeah, if you do play this game the way we want to play it, and you can do it for the consistency of a league season, you'll be in the place you want to be at the end. And it's hard to see that at the beginning of a year when you're going on the road to Arkansas and Vanderbilt and you're getting beat up and sometimes beat up a little bad. And it's a different thing now where, this team, I think, has the capability to go at home and do what they need to do against Auburn. They have the capability to go on the road and do what they need to do against a top 15 team in Mississippi State. But that's if they play clean, and that's if they stick with it. And, it's easy to say to yourself as an individual in an adverse situation, well, they got my number today. If Missouri continues its approach and tries to keep the mistakes to a minimum, they're going to be in ball games down the stretch. And if they're able to win a few of them, they might find themselves in Hoover, Alabama. And if they do, I think that folks from outside those 4 walls, as you mentioned, should look at that as a pretty good accomplishment, considering this was a team that was dropping, weekend Horizon League series, or even in a series, early in the season, and struggling with why can't we win right now, to that those days are behind them. And this is a team that's going to be competitive in this league just so long as they can play the game cleanly and confidently and crisply for 9 innings. When that happens, Missouri's right there in the thick of it, and hopefully they can be in the thick of it for 2 more weekends.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Of course, that their mantra all year has been NOW now, no opportunity wasted. And so certainly you understand this program seeing this as an opportunity to earn something with the way they've played over the second half of the season. So I think that's well put, Matt. That is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover. But Matt, thank you for joining us and filling us in on where we are with Mizzou as the season goes on.
I appreciate the opportunity, Joe. Anytime. Always glad to talk to you.
Want to thank Pitch Logic for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. Want to thank Matt again for joining me, and thank you, the listeners, for listening. We'll talk to y'all